nice to be with you, and in such good company too. And during the next interlude, I'll try and retract some of the incidents that happened over my life, which have been rather varied. And I do hope that those little things that have come along to keep me happy and kept me alive for 100 years will continue to amuse people on radio and TV programs, which I have been doing. It's always a great pleasure. And our narrator here, of course, has got lots of questions to ask, and I hope I can fulfill them adequately. Well, the radio business, as far as I was concerned, started in the 1930s. I was working at a company. I was 14 years old when I joined the company, and I left them 12 years later. But during that time, I had a sponsored program at 3UZ in Melbourne, and the program was 5 o'clock until 5:15, The Care of Pets. And it was my first introduction to radio. And the manager there said, "You're rather young to be sort of doing sponsored programs." I said, "Well, I love radio, I love the people, and I've got to know the routine." In those days, radio was rather primitive. Most people had a crystal set, an ingenious little piece of equipment, no batteries, no power, nothing at all. But it brought in the 6 frequencies, 2 A-class stations, 4 B-class stations, and that was my entire life, apart from my job, which was wool classing. The company was a very high prestige company from Roubaix in France, and incidentally I became the youngest person to do their bidding at the wool exchange, but that's beside the point. But every Friday afternoon I looked forward to that 15 minutes, and Ernest Trotman, Uncle George as he was called, said, "This is your forte." Well, the forecast has come true. I remember those words. We're on the staircase. He said, "Goodbye, Jim. Thanks for another program, but forget all about your work that you're doing. This is your kind of work." And it was. There were breaks in it, various breaks in it. But let's start from the beginning. And I always dreamed of going away. I would spend most of my time in the dock area, watching ships go. I'd even get dressed to go and see a big ship leaving Port Melbourne. All the streamers that were in vogue at that time, people held on to these things, and it was quite exciting for me. And the travel bug took over. And for the first 50 years, I suppose, of my life, I sort of got around and traveled to different countries. Actually, I started off early in show business because I was the youngest person ever to appear at His Majesty's Theatre in Melbourne. I was 3 months old. Mother and father were in show business, particularly father, who was an operetta singer. And I suppose I should have really followed in his footsteps, because I thought that perhaps I might have been a good singer. But that wasn't so. I dabbled with the piano and so forth. But getting back to the His Majesty's Theatre, every time I go there, I look at the big building and I think, well, I'm the youngest person to ever perform there. I think the play was called The Christian. I'm not quite sure about that, but I believe they wanted a baby who could hold his water and didn't break wind. Well, maybe I fulfilled that bill. I don't quite know, but that's beside the point. Then I joined the Merchant Navy in 1942 when my grandparents died. I had charge of 2 of Mother's children at the time, and when she died, the children were passed over to other relatives, and it made me able to get away and do the things I really wanted to do. So I went to West Africa, Venezuela, Fiji, Trinidad, all those places, did a 3-year stint. But the biggest break was with Pan American Airways in Ghana. I love Ghana very much, and it's one of the African countries that have really sort of escaped all the turmoil that has taken place over the years with Africa. And talking about Africa, of course, I love Tangier as well, but that's another interlude, a rather seamy one as far as I was concerned. I was sort of into the flesh trade. I thought, well, I'd never be connected with brothels and so forth, but somebody owed me some money. offered me the bar in return for clearance of the debts. And I said, all right. And I found it was the most well-known brothel in Tangier, El Paradiso. Well, the 14 girls said, do we work here or we don't work here? I said, oh, why not? And those girls taught me a lot about things. I was working for the Pan American Broadcasting System, not at a high wage, but it was a pleasant job. And of course that and the flesh trade business sort of kept the wolf from the door, should we say. But all these kind of things are sort of related to radio in a way. I'd do a job and hoping that the next assignment would be something to do with radio. And it always cropped up. Even Venezuela, when I arrived in Venezuela, the first thing they did was give me a gun and 2 bodyguards with machine guns. Well, after my quiet life at radio stations, this was rather startling. But at that time, Perez Jimenez, the dictator, had been thrown out and President Betancourt took over. It was a rather turbulent time that I joined the company. But I was there for years, and I had to be very careful because they had strife between different parties, even within the city itself. And as I was in the advertising business, I was an enemy to the people who were farmers. And they gave me a beautiful apartment on the main avenue, Francisco de Miranda, and I thought this is something I'd never have in my whole life before. But one day I came back and found it all smashed up. It had to be all repaired, but it rather startled me. And then going to work with 2 bodyguards, who quite often were not quite sober and borrowed money from me. But it was all interesting, and I met a lot of people. But Latin America, even though I loved Caracas and I loved the people that I met there, I never want to go back again somehow. The strife and so forth, and the bullets flying through the window in the office where I worked, and things like that. And it was a rather difficult situation for the people in Venezuela, because in Caracas you had 1 million people, but 600 were immigrants. So there was no kind of, I can't quite explain it. It didn't quite match somehow. Maybe it's different now, that's a long time ago. But I met some people there that I love very much, as you do in every city. No matter where you go, if you don't like something, there's always somebody or somebody that makes a big difference to your life. Well, that's how it was. So I went along from one country to another. I liked Fiji, and I did like Tangier. In spite of all the rather seamy things, my family, I think, were quite shocked, but like everything else, with time, shock disappears. And I was accepted once more. But those were exciting times for me. And then I thought, when I was in Hong Kong, I'm 50 now, what have I done with my life? Nothing. Just had a good time. So I thought, well, now it's time for a change. And a friend of mine, Sam Scott, whom I knew quite well before he came to Bangkok, he said, come here. He said, there's lots of opportunities, the people are nice, the country's nice, you love the food. And I did come, and I was impressed from the first day that I came here. Everybody was so happy, and everybody was much thinner too. And there was something about the city that was quite cozy. I think there were 3 or 4 million people, now there are 10 million people. And all those things have made a difference over the years. I'm talking too much now. I must give our friend the narrator a chance to ask me a question. I'm wandering off, I'm meandering off into all kinds of different avenues. Yes, I never went to school. That may surprise everybody. I had chest trouble, which I still have at the moment. It doesn't trouble me much, but I had to go to Pattaya for 4 years since I've been here because of that. But I missed 90% of the schooling, and the little bit that I had was so miserable, it made me very bitter. It made me very shy and very awkward to deal with when I was young. But when I joined the wool broking company, they were so understanding, and they put up with my idiosyncrasies. In fact, they called me in on one occasion and said, Jim, you've been here for a long, long time. Are you happy? I said, I love working here. I said, you've been here for a year, you've never spoken one word to anybody. They've spoken to you and you've answered, but you've never ever spoken. Is there something wrong? To be quite candid, I didn't realise that how much was wrong. And that had to be rectified through a whole lifetime. I could never face the public. I could never go and meet people, even before teenage. I missed school and I went on a couple of occasions, and I just realised how cruel children can be. I was not one of them at all. And this feeling has permeated my whole life. It's made me awkward to work with, for one thing. You can ask my friend Akmal, he might take his photograph because he's the most loyal person. I'd like him included in the interview. And he puts up with my idiosyncrasies, but I still have them. If I work by myself, I don't notice it. But when I work with somebody else and I have to sort of comply, the old feeling comes up, the resentment comes up, and lots of perks. You had lunch with waiters with white uniforms and all those kind of things. But in April to September, you do what you like, go where you like. And of course I would catch a ship, work on the ship, and go to any country I wished. I got 20 weeks. 4 weeks to get there, 4 weeks to come back, and 4 weeks, 8 weeks there. So that's how it was for many, many years. But it was very satisfying in a way because it was me. I didn't have to comply with anybody. But when I had to sort of do things and be told, well, my workmates will confirm that I'm not the easiest person to work with. Too exacting. Well, first of all, you got up at daybreak at 5 o'clock in the morning. You had to be at the wool stores at 6. And there were all the samples from the different country places, Deniliquin, Echuca, all those country places in Australia. They sent the samples down. And they were great big samples, I mean, maybe 20 bales. The whole thing was how much rubbish and how much oil would it yield when it was completely free. And it's a fallacy to think that fine wool like merino makes the finest clothes. That's not true. It has to be a mixture of crossbred. Then you had the dags, as they call it, the wool behind the sheep's bottom. They made hats out of that. That was hats. But these things you had to learn. You couldn't do it by the book. And after 8 years, I became just as proficient as the bosses were. But then it was all wasted because it was not my type of job.